Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Heavy Metal History. This is a special episode of the podcast I'm doing, as many of you know, going into the 10th anniversary of the podcast. So I thought a little of what I would like to do is kind of get back to the roots of the beginning of the podcast, that I started with my buddy Matt, getting back to those history episodes, because all I've done for the past 2 years is basically interviews. Not that I don't love them, and I still plan on doing them, but I kind of want to put a little more work into the history. That's what this podcast is about. So, with that, I thought I would revisit a bunch of episodes that I've already done and kind of do some new ones. And so, with that, we're going to start off with, the thing that started the podcast off with me and Matt. I'm going to be going back and revisiting the Black Sabbath episodes. Yes, I've gotten all new information. I'm going to re-edit everything into a nice little YouTube video, like a documentary style kind of thing. It'll be very long form. Yes, I know everybody's done Black Sabbath videos to death, especially after last year, after losing Ozzy. They were popping up left and right. And that's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to start from the beginning of Black Sabbath, and I'm going to go all the way to the very end with the final show with Ozzy. This could take all year. This could take a couple months. It just kind of depends on the workflow. Right now, I'm kind of up to Sabotage. That's where I'm at in the career. And, trying to find every little piece of history from books, from videos, from interviews, every little thing I can to make this super in depth. I don't want to miss out on any little story here. So that's kind of what we got right now in this episode. It's our special presentation, I guess you can call it. Thank you all so much for checking this out. If you do enjoy this, please consider subscribing on the YouTube. It helps out a whole lot. I got a lot of catching up to do. Just hit that like and subscribe button. You all know the drill. Everybody says it every YouTube video. Just do it. It doesn't cost you anything. So without further ado, let's get into Black Sabbath. Welcome to this Heavy Metal History special presentation of the history of Black Sabbath. The heavy metal genre itself is going into its 5th decade of existence. Its inception, like most genres, is often mired in varying opinions of its genesis and formation. Some outlooks would point to bands like Led Zeppelin or even the Beatles as responsible due to their influences on the bands that would eventually push the boundaries of tonality, creating the genre. But most people that look back at music history would pretty much unanimously agree the band that changed the sonic landscape of the genre way back in 1969 was a band from Birmingham, England, who would eventually call themselves Black Sabbath. Now, before we jump into the history of the band, it's important to look at what made them stand out against their peers. Musically, their songs took on a darker tone of songwriting. Things like the occult and darkness were sporadic throughout the initial songwriting, not overt and prevalent as many people would like you to believe. And this is something that would actually plague the band in their initial stages and at varying times throughout their career and Ozzy's solo career over the years. Being accused of being devil worshippers or having satanic music and things of that nature. The guitars utilized a lot of gain in the tone, and Tony Iommi always tried to find amps that gave more and more gain throughout the years. And also by their third album, he would eventually downtune the guitars to get a deeper baritone-like sound, along with the compositions of some of the songs utilizing what is called a tritone, aka the devil's interval. All of these aspects started the blueprint and experimentation that would eventually give way to the heavy metal genre, which would go more and more extreme over the decades to come. But what about the origins of the band? Let's start sometime in 1968, where Bill Ward and Tony Iommi were in a band called Mythology. The band itself played kind of standard blues jams for that era, but Mythology had some regional success. but they eventually disbanded after an incident where all 4 members were arrested and fined 15 pounds for possession of cannabis resin on the 27th of May, 1968. Much of their gigging work dried up soon after this event, and they soon disbanded after the final show at the Queen's Hotel in Siloth on July 13th, 1968. Now, during the same time, Geezer Butler and Ozzy Osbourne were in a band called Rare Breed. That band also didn't last long. They played a total of 2 shows and then disbanded themselves. With the dissolution of those 2 bands in 1968, the 2 separate entities began looking for other bands. And now a story that goes along with this.
Yes.
Is that the way? Is that true?
Yes, it is true. I mean, Ozzy was at school in a younger year than me.
Yeah.
With me, but I didn't really associate with him at school. And we were looking for a singer, Bill and myself, the drummer, and we went around the music shop and we saw this ad: Ozzy Zig requires gig.
Oh.
I said to Bill, I know an Ozzy. I said, but it can't be him.
Can't be the same guy.
And sure enough, we went round to the address of their house and knocked the door, and his mother came. John, it's for you. Yeah. And I saw him walking up the hall, and I said to Bill, forget it. Anyway, he came to the door, and we talked to him for a bit, and then we left. And I said to Bill, forget that. You know, I said, we don't want to go there. I said, as far as I know, he can't sing. I never knew he could sing.
Yep.
And then sort of a few days later, Ozzy came round to my house. So I didn't live that far away from him. He came round with Geezer, the bass player, and looking for a drummer. And it turns out that I said, well, Bill's a drummer. And Bill said, no, I'm sticking with you.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, why don't we all get together and have a go? And that's what we did.
And you did.
So this moment was kind of their origin. After that, Bill, Ozzy, Tony, and Geezer would then join to form a new band, the Polka Tulk Blues Band. The name was supposedly named after a Pakistani Indian clothing shop that was on the way to their first ever show. This name, however, would not stick. The group at that time also included slide guitarist Jimmy Phillips, who was a childhood friend of Ozzy's, and saxophonist Alan Clark. After that, they shortened the name to Polka Tulk, which was coined by Ozzy, and the band again would later change their name to Earth. That name was Bill Ward's idea. In the early days of the band, they mostly played a lot of blues and pop numbers along with some Beatles covers. Now, during this time in Polka Tulk, Iommi kind of became concerned that Phillips and Clark kind of lacked the necessary dedication and were not taking the band seriously. Rather than asking them to leave, they instead decided to break up and then quietly reform the band as a 4-piece. While the band was performing under the Earth moniker, they had recorded several demos written by Norman Haynes, such as The Rebel, When I Came Down, and Song for Jim, the latter of which being a reference to Jim Simpson, who was a manager for the band's Bakerloo Blues Line and Tian Symphony, as well as a trumpet player for the group Locomotive. Simpson had recently started a new club named Henry's Blues House at the Crown Hotel in Birmingham and offered to let Earth play there after they agreed to waive the usual support band fee in return for free t-shirts. The audience response was positive, and then Simpson agreed to manage Earth. Now, in December of 1968, Tony Iommi abruptly left Earth to join Jethro Tull. Although his stint with the band would be very short-lived, Iommi actually made an appearance with Jethro Tull on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus TV show. He was very unsatisfied with the direction of Jethro Tull, and he returned to Earth by the end of the month. He says, quote, "It just wasn't right, so I left. At first, I thought Tull were great, but I didn't much go for having a leader in the band, which was Ian Anderson's way. When I come back from Tull, I came back with a new attitude altogether. They taught me that to get on, you got to work for it."
7 3/4 of an hour spots a day, which was a lot to do, really. We'd start at like 2 in the afternoon and then go right through, 3/4 of an hour, have a 1/4 of an hour break, another thing. And we'd be playing to like 2 people when we start, and probably about 5 at the end of the night, But it was good for us. It was good practice, and it enabled us to really pull ourselves together, and it was the foundation of what we're all about, really.
Yeah, I mean, you were more sort of bluesy based then, weren't you? I mean, it definitely wasn't as hard. I mean, say when sort of you did the first album, that Black Sabbath album, I mean, that was renowned as just a wall of total noise, and nobody seemed to be doing that at that time. I mean, where did that evolve from? I mean, where did you arrive at that from sort of what you were doing when you were gigging? earlier on.
Well,
So in 1969, the Earth name was also to be somewhat of a short-lived moniker as well. While the band had begun touring and playing shows under that name, unbeknownst to them, another band also in England had also been using that same name. It led to kind of a strange moment where the band had been booked to play a show, but the promoters booking the show thought they were the other band Earth, who played a completely different style of music. So this incident really led to the immediate change of the band name, which Geezer Butler came up with after seeing a movie marquee with the name Black Sabbath on it, which was across the street from their rehearsal space. While watching people line up to see the film, Butler noted that it was, quote, strange that people spend so much money to see scary movies. Following that, Osborne and Butler wrote lyrics for a song called Black Sabbath, which was inspired by the work of horror and adventure story writer Dennis Wheatley. Along with that, Butler had a vision of a black silhouetted figure standing at the foot of his bed, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, on August 22nd, 1969, the newly anointed Black Sabbath went into Trident Studios in London's Soho area to record a demo of The Rebel, with Norman Haynes himself sitting in on piano and organ. The session was produced by Gus Dudgeon and engineered by Roger Bain. In all, an amazing 19 takes were done of this song. Ozzy has said, quote, Gus Dudgeon tried to tell us what to do. And if you knew us back then, you'd understand that when we got ordered to do something a certain way, then we deliberately fuck it up. Gus was lucky that Tony didn't wrap his guitar around his head. So the band's first show as Black Sabbath took place August 30th of 1969 in Workington, England. They signed to Philips Records in November of 1969, and they recorded their first single, Evil Woman, which was a cover song by the band Crow, at Trident Studios. Evil Woman was released on January 9th, 1970 through Philips' subsidiary Fontana Records. Later releases were handled by Philips' newly formed progressive rock label Vertigo Records, and of course, the single failed to chart. So now we're going to be going into October and November of 1969, where the self-titled album recording begins. Your lineup of Black Sabbath at this time was Ozzy Osbourne on vocals and harmonica, Tony Iommi on guitars, Geezer Butler on the bass, Bill Ward on drums. And on the production side of it, you had Roger Bain, who did the production and the Jew's harp on Sleeping Village, Tom Allom, who did the engineering, Barry Sheffield, who did the engineering, and Keefe, who did the graphic design and photography. The album itself is 7 tracks, over 38 minutes and 8 seconds for the UK version, 39 minutes and 24 seconds for the US release. The track list on this album is, the opener is Black Sabbath, track number 2 is The Wizard, track number 3 is Behind the Wall of Sleep, track number 4 is NIB, track number 5 is Wicked World, track number 6 is Sleeping Village, and track number 7 is Warning. Now, on different versions of this record, you have the intro for Behind the Wall of Sleep is actually called Wasp, and the intro to NIB is called Basically, and the intro to Sleeping Village is called A Bit of Finger. They have added pieces to those songs in different versions. Now, the album itself was recorded at Regent Sound Studios on Denmark Street in London in a 12-hour session on October the 16th of 1969. But there is conflicting information that also states it was supposedly recorded on November 17th of 1969. I could not find a definitive date. Now, the key to the band's distinct new sound on the album was Iommi's distinctive playing style that he developed after an accident at a sheet metal factory where he was working at the age of 17, in which the tips of his middle fingers of his fretting hand were severed.
See here, where we want it there. That one, that finger and that finger, where I used to do sheet metal work. What happened one day, the day I was leaving, funny enough, from the job to turn professional, the old turn professional one, and I was doing some, pressing this piece of metal that I used to have to weld afterwards, and the press just came straight down on me, and of course, as you pull it back, I pulled the ends of the fingers off, and at the time I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what I'd done. I got a squeezy bottle and melted it down, made it into a ball, got a hot soldering iron and made a sort of hole in it and got it down to fit my finger. So I've got this big ball on the end of my finger. Then I sat there all night filing it down with some sandpaper to make a shape of a thimble. Then I put some leather on it because it wouldn't grip otherwise. It was plastic, it'd just slip off the string. I put some leather on, which made something like this, which is a plastic and then leather on it. And I used that and off I went.
Later, he would downtune the guitar on the album Master of Reality to make its playability even less painful. He says, quote, I'd play a lot of chords and I'd have to play fifths because I couldn't play fourths because of my fingers. And he continues and he says, quote, that helped me develop my style of playing, bending the strings and hitting the open string at the same time just to make the sound wilder. In the same interview, bassist Geezer Butler had added that, quote, back then, the bass player was supposed to do all these melodic runs, but I didn't know how to do that because I'd been a guitarist, so all I did was follow Tony's riff, and that made it sound heavier. Now, Iommi began recording the album with a white Fender Stratocaster, his guitar of choice at the time, until a malfunctioning pickup forced him to finish recording with a Gibson SG, a guitar he had actually recently purchased as a backup but had never really played. The SG was a right-handed model, which he's a left-handed player, so he had to play it upside down. Soon after recording the album, he met a right-handed guitarist who was also playing a left-handed SG upside down, and the two agreed to swap guitars. Now, this SG became Iommi's main guitar that he modified, and later he says, quote, put out to pasture at the Hard Rock Cafe. During this time, Geezer also talked about the gear he used on this album, saying, quote, on the first two albums, I used a P-Bass. On the very first album, I used a Laney 70-watt guitar amp through a Park 4x12 cabinet. It only had 3 speakers in it because I couldn't afford to buy a 4th speaker. And the strings were probably old roto sounds, as I think that was the only choice in those days. And they were roto wound, but were so old they probably sounded like flat wounds. So, in the studio, recording begins, and as Iommi recalls, he says, quote, we thought we have 2 days to do it, and one of the days is mixing. So we played live. Ozzy was singing at the same time. We just put him in a separate booth and off we went. We never had a second run of most of the stuff. And he continues on saying, quote, well, there was one day set aside to mix it, but we had to get all of our parts done on that first day. It was the way things were done in those days. We had no choice. All we could do was set up in the small room and play the songs through. Mind you, it played to our strengths because by then we were a really good live band. And he continues on to say, we just went into the studio and did it in a day. We played our live set, and that was it. Aside from the bells, thunder, and rain sound effects added to the beginning of the opening track and the double-tracked guitar solos on NIB and Sleeping Village, there were virtually no overdubs added to the album. We had to be really careful to make sure there were no mistakes. Otherwise, they might end up staying on the record. As I recall, we did have the luxury of doing 1 or 2 songs for a second time, but that was it. And in Geezer's recollection of the recording, he said, quote, Tony did get to do a couple of overdubs on guitar, but when we asked, all we got from Roger and Tom were sighs of frustration. Time was so tight that when Ozzy asked if he could do a few additional vocals, he was told, nope, sorry, time's up, now just fuck off. We actually thought a whole day was quite a long time, and then off we went the next day to play for 20 pounds in Switzerland. And, Black Sabbath vocalist Ozzy has always spoken fondly of the recording of the band's debut album, stating in his autobiography, I Am Ozzy, quote, once we had finished, we spent a couple of hours double tracking some of the guitars and vocals, and that was that. Done. We were in the pub in time for last orders. It can't have taken any longer than 12 hours in total. That's how albums should be made, in my opinion. And drummer Bill Ward has also said, quote, I think the first album is just absolutely incredible. It's naive, and there's an absolute sense of unity. It's not contrived in any way, shape, or form. We weren't old enough to be clever. I love it all, including the mistakes. And Butler also added, it was literally live in the studio. I mean, Roger Bain, he's the genius. He's got a way that he captured the band in such a short amount of time. And from Tony Iommi's autobiography, he says that, he kind of plays down the producer's role, insisting, quote, we didn't choose to work with Roger Bain. He was kind of chosen for us. He was good to have around, but we didn't really get a lot of advice from him. He may have suggested a couple things, but the songs were already fairly structured and sorted. And Bill Ward says that, we worked hard. Quote, we would get up early and be playing by 9:30 a.m. We had a rehearsal room in Birmingham until lunchtime, and then we'd go back to Tony's house and drink tea, eat toast, and scrounge cigarettes off his mom. Then we'd be playing a gig almost every single night. Now, a couple facts about some of the tracks on this album. Contrary to popular belief, NIB does not stand for Nativity in Black. It is actually a reference to a nickname the band had for Bill Ward's beard at the time, which was Pen Nib. They would call him Nib. And the original working title for the wizard was Sign of the Sorcerer. Now, the release of this album, depending on the country, is riddled with a few errors, kind of like I mentioned earlier. The original North American Warner Brothers record pressings of Black Sabbath list incorrect running times for Wicked World and Warning, given that one's 4 minutes and 30 seconds and 14 minutes and 32 seconds, respectively, and also credit the album's original songs using the band members' given names, which are Anthony Iommi, John Osborne, Terrence Butler, and William Ward. There's also a misprint in the credits where Ozzy is spelled incorrectly as Aussie. That is, instead of O-Z-Z-Y, it's spelled O-S-S-I-E. Now let's talk a little bit about the artwork for the album. The cover photograph itself was shot at Malperdham Watermill, situated on the River Thames in Oxfordshire, England, by photographer Keith McMillan, aka Keith. He was in charge of the overall design. So standing in front of the watermill is a figure dressed in a black cloak portrayed by model Louisa Livingstone, whose identity was not even widely known until 2020. And speaking on that, in an interview, she said, quote, I'm sure that McMillan said it was for Black Sabbath, but I don't know if that meant anything much to me at the time. Adding that it had been freezing cold during the shoot and that she had to get up at about 4 o'clock in the morning. Keith was rushing around with dry ice, throwing it into water, and it didn't seem to be working very well, so he ended up using a smoke machine. Also, according to McMillan, Livingstone was wearing absolutely nothing underneath a black cloak, and some experimentation was done involving some slightly more risque photographs taken at the session. And ultimately, McMillan decided that none of that worked, saying, quote, any kind of sexuality took away from the more foreboding mood. But she was a terrific model. She has amazing courage and understanding of what I was trying to do. Now, the inner gatefold sleeve of the original release featured an inverted cross containing a poem written by Roger Brown, who was McMillan's photography assistant. The band were reportedly upset when they discovered this, as it kind of fueled more allegations that they were Satanists or occultists, as mentioned earlier. However, in Osborne's memoirs, he says that to the best of his knowledge, nobody was upset with the inclusion. Whereas Iommi's recollection is a little bit different, saying, quote, suddenly we had all these crazy people turning up at shows. I think Alex Sanders, who is a high priest of the Wiccan religion, turned up at a gig once. It was all quite strange, really. Now, for the look of the cover, McMillan used Kodak infrared aerochrome film, which was designed for aerial photographs, and it gave that portrait its more pinkish hue. You can kind of see a similar look on the first album cover he designed. Now, later on, he did a little bit of tweaking in the chemistry to get that slightly dark, surrealistic, evil kind of feel to it. Since it was a sensitive film, he would boil it and then freeze it to make the image grainy and undefined. Now, no one at the label Vertigo asked them for their input on the art, so they were quite surprised when their manager first presented them with a full LP package shortly before its release. And Tony Iommi said, quote, we really liked it, the album sleeve. We liked everything at first. It was really exciting because we'd finally got an album out and everything was exciting. And Bill Ward has said, quote, I love the front cover. I thought it was mysterious. It's kind of like we kind of hung our hats, to be honest with you. All that was fantastic to me. I hated when I opened up the middle part and somebody put an upside down cross in it. I hated that because that wasn't who we were, and nobody had talked to the band about that. I think that they had wanted a certain image or they wanted it to be a certain way. I don't know what they thought, but it gave us an image that we fought in the press over for maybe 4 or 5 years. And Livingstone himself has said, quote, when I saw the cover, I thought it was quite interesting, but I thought, well, that could be anybody, so it's not like I got any kind of ego buzz out of it. But yeah, I thought it was a very nice cover. Now, the craziest thing about this time is before they would even finish their tour, the band would play in Zurich and already start writing songs for Paranoid. The way they did this is they would play a music club in Zurich, Switzerland in the fall of 1969. And they played at a club that was known as the Beat Club, also called the Hirschen Club, on the ground floor of the Hotel Hirschen in Zurich's Old Town. Now, this engagement included 7 45-minute sets per day for about 6 weeks. And Black Sabbath really didn't have that much material back then, so they played only one song per set, but they played it for 45 minutes. So the Beat Club really gave the birth to Paranoid in its infantile stages. And now talking about the band's very first tour. Black Sabbath was released Friday, February 13th, 1970 in the UK, and almost 4 months later, June 1st, 1970 in the US. The band would immediately begin to play shows right after recording in order to capitalize on the success of the album. So the band, riding on that musical inspiration high, would already also have material ready for another. The band was all gas and no brakes moving forward into this era. The inspiration is seemingly endless. These writing sessions supposedly took place in Zurich. A log sheet for one of the recording sessions for Black Sabbath shows that they had already written Fairies Wear Boots at the time of their first album. The track would later close out what would become Paranoid. And bassist Geezer Butler recalls that the band had all the music, but no lyrics to what would become the album's opening track, War Pigs. During the band's tour, they would take off time to do something no band had really done at this time. They started demos for Paranoid during the tour for their first album to kind of keep that momentum going of the band and the songs and the inspiration that they had going. But that's a tale for the next episode.